start with what polling shows is one of the top issues in this year's election, immigration. Do you support President Biden's executive order recently that blocks migrants' access to asylum when illegal border crossings exceed that 2,500 a day mark?
I think that the executive order doesn't accomplish what the bipartisan border bill did accomplish, in which we did have an opportunity to pass and that Lauren Boebert did not. So I think that in order to address immigration, as you're saying, it is a real issue. We need comprehensive reform.
Do you support the executive order, though, in the meantime, since they couldn't pass that bill?
The executive order is out. It's beyond the scope of Congress. I mean, I think we need pathways to citizenship. And we're in a competition right now with China and Russia for STEM talent. So we want to remain a place that talent wants to be, and we need to make sure that those folks can get here easily.
So what more should be done, do you think, to secure the border?
Well, we can go ahead and fund the government. I mean, there's certain provisions right now where we have maybe even authorized but not necessarily appropriated the funding for certain things like fentanyl machines that could scan for fentanyl that are sitting unused right now. So go ahead and make sure that we're using the full scope of protections we currently have instead of playing games with the issue.
Should there be a pathway to citizenship, do you think, for those who are here right now illegally?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And this is a workforce issue. As long as there are people who can be exploited because of their documentation status, it drives down the quality of work and jobs for everybody. And immigrants are such a key part of our economy, both for our farm workers. I know I just went through end of life with my parents. Our care workers included migrants as well. They're a key part of our economy.
What is the responsibility, do you think, of the federal government to support the migrants here?
I think especially, again, in our competition with China and Russia, we need to be recruiting and remain a place where those folks in STEM can come to the United States, and where we have our very high performers, whether they're PhD or postdocs, that they can very easily have a pathway to citizenship. I mean, same for folks who are working in our meatpacking plants and our care facilities.
I'm thinking of the migrants who are coming here recently, by the busload even into Denver. What is the federal government's responsibility to take care of them?
Absolutely. I mean, we need to close the amnesty loophole, absolutely, because we do not want a giant loophole where folks can take advantage of it. We need to be working with our farmers and ranchers to make sure that we're connecting people who are coming here with the actual workforce needs, making sure that people are indeed, documented and that we can bring them into the systems.
Financially, should the federal government be supporting them too?
Not necessarily. I think, again, by reforming the entire system, we can get these folks into the system so they're paying taxes and actually becoming an official part of our economy instead of existing in the shadows.
You mentioned fentanyl. Former President Trump thinks that the military should be deployed to go after the Mexican drug cartels. Do you agree?
I don't think that that's the best approach to addressing the problem. I think we even need to look at kind of the bigger scope. Why are people turning to fentanyl, right? I just talked to a woman who had recently actually recovered from her own struggle with drugs out in Sterling, and her daughter is addicted to fentanyl. And I asked her, I said, ma'am, why is that? What's going on in Sterling? Did your daughter have jobs? Did she have opportunities for education? And she said, no, there's nothing here. So we're looking at second generation drug addiction because there are no economic opportunities where these folks are. So that's what root cause of the issue. Let's make sure there's more economic opportunities that meet people wherever they are.
What change, if any, would you make to work visas?
To work visas, we need to expedite the H-1N1 visas, especially from partners in places like India. Right? That's the biggest democracy in the world, and as we seek to outcompete China, we want to make sure that there's pathways for those folks to become citizens and to come on over and help contribute to our science and engineering enterprise and to our economy.
Speaking of economy, let's talk about the national debt, which is nearly $35 trillion right now. Where does deficit reduction fit into your policy priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to point, we were on track to reduce the deficit, actually. And then we got the Trump and the Bush tax cuts. And a lot of those were actually at the cost of the middle class. So we need to alleviate the burden of taxes on the middle class and go ahead and tax the wealthiest, like 0.1%, their fair share.
So in terms of the 2017 tax cuts in particular, which expire in 2025, do you support extending any of those?
No, and in fact, that last year, billionaires became wealthier due to inheritance than because of entrepreneurship. this is hurting our economy in the way we're innovating and we're creating new jobs, new products, discovering new things, and leading the world, frankly, in innovation. That's not happening right now because of that concentration of wealth at the top that's just being directly handed down. So I think we should tax the billionaires who are just going to be inheriting billions, frankly.
Do you support any new tax credits in particular? And if so, how would you pay for those?
Absolutely. Potentially tax credits as we look for our farmers and ranchers transitioning away from maybe water-intensive crops to other things like solar panels or potentially like windmills as well. I think that those are already in there and some of them are provided for.
So politicians often cite eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse as a way to reduce the deficit. Are there any federal programs or even agencies that you would consider cutting?
I'd have to go through it line by line. I will tell you this. I work at the United States, I worked at the U.S. National Science Foundation, a $10 billion independent federal agency. And the work they do is critical to American competitiveness. So I think we get kind of a bad rap as this boogeyman, but we keep the country going. We keep it at the forefront of innovation and competitiveness. So no, not off the top of my head. I mean, I'd have to go through it and look at it once I'm in Congress. But I think right now what we have in government, we really even need to update it, frankly, so that it can better serve the people.
So I talked to you about the national debt being $35 trillion. Do you support a constitutional balanced budget amendment?
That's not my priority, potentially. I could be open to it, but right now that's not necessarily my priority.
Okay. Social Security and Medicare. The latest Social Security and Medicare trustees report says Social Security will be insolvent by 2035, Medicare by 2036. And the trustees say in order to keep the program solvent, either revenues need to increase by an amount equal to a permanent payroll tax increase of 3.3%, or benefits need to be permanently reduced for current and future beneficiaries by nearly 21%. Do you support a payroll tax increase or a reduction in benefits?
Potentially the payroll tax increase, but I think we also need to scrap the cap. So again, let's make those billionaires pay their fair share. And I will say, Medicare is so important. Part A, that's how I was able to provide home hospice for my parents who both had cancer. That is a critical benefit that our seniors were promised and earned. I know it's how critical it is personally, both to them and to families. So I am opposed to cutting Social Security, Medicare, or raising the retirement age.
But the cap in terms of how much of the income is taxed for Social Security, which it's, I think, $168,000 or something right now. Okay. Do you support, well, I guess, what would you do to make sure?
Scrap the cap. Let's scrap the cap.
And that would make sure it's solvent.
Well, I think that helps them, and look at what are we doing for care, right? A lot of it is the burden is shifting to home care, to home health care workers. So how can we maybe adjust the system to better adapt to the actual needs, as well as the biotechnology innovations that we are having? So we need to better enable people to be able to take care of their families through Medicare as well.
Do you think the retirement age should be increased?
No.
Should Social Security maybe be means tested so that it's, based on the assets that you have?
I mean, that's a potential means testing we got to get creative. This is a problem. Let's be we need to make sure that this is solvent. So that could potentially be one policy that we could look at.
So farming, obviously very important in CD4, and Congress currently is negotiating a new 5-year farm bill. 73% of the farm bill is food stamp programs right now. Do you think farming and food stamps should be under separate bills maybe?
No. I mean, farming's critical, and food ain't optional. We all got to eat, right? Including people who maybe do not have the means in order to be able to feed their families. And WIC, specifically, that program that feeds infants and children, is critical. And as one of the leading producing districts in the country, there is no reason anybody in Colorado should be going hungry. We need to make sure that the policies support our growers so they can grow and export more food.
So the bill that passed the House Ag Committee would result in a nearly $30 billion reduction in SNAP benefits over 10 years. Do you support that?
No, I do not. And I would try to find other ways where we could pass that and supplement that, because again, nobody should be going hungry in our district.
The Ag Committee approved an amendment to the Farm Bill that would close a loophole in the 2018 law that allowed for intoxicating hemp-derived products like Delta-8 THC, which you may have heard of, Delta-9, Delta-10 there is. Do you support closing that loophole, which would be a huge blow to some hemp farmers?
if that's going to prohibit the way we're manufacturing hemp for other products, we can be making, actually at the National Science Foundation, they're pioneering some very fascinating things that we can do with hemp. We're talking about building materials, clothing, renewables. So if we're saying no to Delta 8 or those things, that's fine. Like, we should regulate that, but let's make sure that there's other ways where, you know, maybe farmers can get grants to start innovating into the future for how we could be using hemp.
The Justice Department reclassified marijuana as a Schedule III drug. Do you support that, and should it be removed from the Controlled Substances Act altogether?
Oh my goodness, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk about health care. Healthcare spending is projected to rise faster than any other federal government program over the next few decades. It's, I think, a quarter of the budget right now. How would you curb healthcare spending while maintaining or even improving the quality of healthcare?
Well, what's so fascinating is I know Lauren Boebert had a little bit of a healthcare scare recently, and she talked about how she was texting with her doctor, and then she was able to go into a hospital. 2/3 of our district do not have access to that hospital or even have the internet. Okay, so where they're not going to be texting with a provider. We need to bring care up to this century. Let's start there. If we have rural internet, that expands telehealth possibilities.
So you mentioned the lack of rural health care. Colorado has 43 rural hospitals. Half of them are in the red. And the CEOs say they can't get loans because banks see them as risks. So should the federal government help, and if so, how?
Oh my goodness, yes. However we can, through the Department of Agriculture, we need to make sure that these hospitals are solvent and that they continue to serve their communities. We also, our rural communities have been dying for a long time. Get that internet, right? Let's make these attractive places where young families want to be, right? And manufacture housing, make it affordable, and I think we could see a real revival all throughout CD4, actually.
Do you support Medicare for all? And if so, how would you pay for it?
I do, and I think that we need to make the billionaires pay their fair share.
So water, also a huge issue for the entire state,
Yes.
really. Years ago, Thornton bought up farms around northern Colorado, and the city is now cashing in on the water rights. Douglas County has also considered buying water from the San Luis Valley. Do you support urban areas taking water from rural areas?
I know the plan you're talking about, and it is absurd, and I think there's even a federal law that would prevent it from ever happening. It is a horrible idea. However, there is, I believe it's called the Platte River Partnership, which is, it aims to get 75% renewable. This is not even having to deal with the water compact of the downflow. This is just on the Platte. It is a phenomenal, I went to a presentation, it is very, very helpful. It's a partnership with Parker and the South Platte water districts, and I think something like that is very reasonable.
But in terms of these growing urban areas looking to rural areas, the buy and dry concept, do you support that?
Not. Absolutely
Okay.
not. They should not be, and they should be working together, frankly.
Do you support additional tax credits for renewable energy? And if so, how do you pay for those?
I sure do. I sure do. I mean, it's to incentivize the market. We want that innovation happening here. We want to see it in America. We want it made in CD4. So that's, yeah.
And in terms of paying for those?
I think that it pays for itself eventually, right? Like, we want to corner the market, and right now, China's outpacing us. Mm-hmm. They're flooding the global market with their EVs, with their technology. If we're going to lead the world with our standards and our values, including high labor standards, we need to incentivize that.
Do you support a ban on new oil and gas drilling?
Potentially. It depends how. There's a very big difference between, say, a coal community and a coal company. And I'm actually endorsed by the United Mine Workers of America. Thank you very much. And so we need to make sure that we're taking care of those communities first. In terms of our geopolitical strategy of what do we need the gas for, what is it part of a drawdown strategy? But it has to be part of the transition. We must transition. It is critical.
It's making sure you take care of the workers who are working in that. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
ma'am. Yeah.
When you talk about community, right? Do you support any new gun control laws?
Well, I don't necessarily know if I'd call it gun control, but responsible gun ownership, surely. Absolutely. I think things like a gun lock that can prevent the leading cause of death in children is a simple measure.
What about the red flag law? Do you think we need something like that at the federal level?
Absolutely.
Let's
And I would like to point out that there, domestic abuse and violence, if you look at some of the people I'm running against, it's a very terrifying issue that we would even elect folks who pretend to have a questionable record on that.
So, foreign policy. Should the federal government do more, do less to help Israel? And what about the Palestinians?
I always like to start from a place of peace. Peace first, especially after having seen my own parents pass. I can understand how heartbreaking it would be to see your family be held hostage, as well as the slaughter of innocent children and families in Gaza. I think that Biden has done a better job recently stepping up in terms of conditioning the aid, especially in Rafah. I absolutely return the hostages, let's get a ceasefire and a two-state solution.
Do you feel like the U.S. has done enough to help Israel, though, at this point? They just approved, Congress did, an aid package for Ukraine and Israel.
Yes, as well, and,
okay.
of course with aid to Palestinians, right. We need to make sure that that aid is actually reaching the Palestinians as well.
Should the U.S. send troops to Taiwan if it's attacked by China?
Absolutely, it should.
And how would you rate President Joe Biden's performance as president?
I mean, he's the most pro-union president we have. He showed up to a strike line, right, to UAW. So I think in those terms, pretty well. I mean, and we could be in such a worse position. That's the other thing. It is definitely still tough, right? Working class families know it is hard to put food on the table, to keep up with the cost of everything. But imagine where we could be. We were on the brink of a depression. And Biden policies did pull us back. We have a long way to go yet. We have a long way to go. But where we could have been would have been so much more devastating.
So overall, pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah. And would you have preferred a Democratic candidate other than President Biden this year?
No, I think he's our standard bearer.
Okay. Lastly, this is obviously an overwhelming Republican district. So how do you win in a district like this?
Actually, gently, I will push back. It's not. It's unaffiliated. It is an unaffiliated district.
Republicans have an edge in this district.
They certainly do. So I was raised by conservative Republicans. I absolutely was. My dad was a lifelong Republican, and he actually told me before he passed to step up and run. So that's what I'm doing. And I have experience, again, coming from the labor movement, AFL-CIO. We represent and work with people from all over, every political belief and background. And working in government, you're nonpartisan, right? You have to get your job done. And in fact, I work directly for a Trump appointee.
Is there some issues that you connect with conservatives on in particular, though?
Absolutely. American competitiveness, on jobs in the economy. I mean, there's so many things that do unite us once you get rid of those labels, right? We all care about our family. We all want to be able to feed our family, to go to sleep without worrying, is there going to be a roof over our head, and can we pay for our health insurance? Yeah.